Hello, 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 and welcome to Jessie James Beads. How are you doing today? My name is Jem, and I'm here today with some fabulous bead mixes. So give me a quick shout, give me a wave, give me a heart, give me a weather report. Just come and say hi, don't be shy. So what happens on a Jessie James Beads live? We have a look at some beads and then we make stuff with some beads. What could be more fun? Now, I have to say, I might be slightly biased, but I love these mixes. We are working with two mixes today. From Colour Trends, we've got Tokyo Nights, and it is a festival, an explosion of rainbow colours. Absolutely gorgeous. But we've decided, or Sarah, in her infinite wisdom, has decided that we're going to mix that with a mini mix in Blackberry Baby. Now that is a little bit more seductive, controlled, monochrome chic. Slam them together and you get something that is absolutely out of this world. So we're going to look at making things with a little bit of wire, but it's all absolutely super beginner friendly. So if nothing else, have a bit of a sit down for 5 minutes and enjoy looking at the bead mixes. And we will go through a couple of different techniques that you can use to build up a big old chain. Now, one of the things I love about making jewellery with chain from wire is that you can make it really small. You could just do a couple of links together to make a simple drop earring. You could make a bracelet, you could make a choker, go the whole hog, make a sweet, or make a really lovely long line necklace. There's lots of choices and you can go as far as you desire. Why don't we head down to the board? Let's press the mouse thing. There we go. And we'll have a quick look at some of these beads. Now, if we haven't met before, my name is Jem and I tend to work with wire teamed up with my beads. So I hope that you will enjoy hanging out here today on the Jessie James Beads Live, or later it will go up on the blog and on YouTube and all of those fun places. So this is just an example of one of the lovely, colourful, inspired pieces that we can work towards making. If you fancy having a go, don't forget to share your makes with us in the Jessie James Beads Secret Stash group. Have a look. Have a play, share us your creativity. So the super colourful beads today are coming from the Colour Trends bead mix in Tokyo Nights, which I think is just a fantastic name to go with a fantastically colourful bead mix. Jessica is in. Hello, sweetheart. How are you today? How's your life? What have you been up to? How's the temperature? Give me a weather report. Tell me what you're up to. Let's just move that mouse out of the way so I don't accidentally boink it on the floor. Sarah is here. Hello and good morning. Coffee and beads with Jem. I would show you the cup of coffee I'm having because it's a little bit earlier today so I can join you in a coffee, but it looks terrible. So why don't we just take a quick gander through some of the beads from Tokyo Nights. What an absolutely fabulous explosion of colours, textures, shapes, different metallics. I can see both gold and silver metallics there. We've got coated beads, we've got crystals, we've got faux pearls, we've got frosted, we've got opaque, we've got so much fun. Laurie is in from cloudy Iowa. Hello, darling. How are you today? I hope that you are well, despite the clouds. It's been cloudy here today. Blah. Betty is in. Hello, sweetheart. How are you doing today? Whereabouts are you joining us from, Betty? Sarah says it's a pretty bracelet. This is going to be fun to make, but it was kind of Sarah's idea. So, you know, you can play around with the wire techniques that we're going to work towards today. And what you'll see, if you're a little bit more eagle-eyed, is that there are so many different ways that you can link beads together just using lengths of wire. Now, I am a huge fan of mixing metals. We human beings are all unique and beautiful souls, and whomever we find our love with, it's a bit like beads. So I've popped on this little length here There's a black, almost like a Blackberry one. It'll go really well with that little mix. I've teamed that with some frosty looking purple coated bicones. So you might not think to put those together, but I do. So I'm doing a bit of a mix and a match, not only with the techniques. I've got a traditional rosary link there. Margaret says, hi Gem, hope you're well. Sorry I missed you live last night. Don't worry, pet. I hope that you're doing as well as you possibly can be. Lots of love to you. I've got a slightly different rosary link here, not only because I've popped 3 beads together, but because we popped a couple of little swirls over the surface. Now you could do that with just a single bead if you wanted to, but like I said earlier, I'm a massive fan of putting things together. So there's some copper wire, there's some antique bronze colour wire. There's some haloed beads. I'll show you how to do one of those today as well as your standard rosary linking, and you can go for odds and evens. So that one's got a swirl on just the one end, and then this one's got a little bit of detail over the surface of the bead. So there's lots of different ways, even with the same technique. So this is a haloing technique. You can see that the wire starts at one end and drops down, goes underneath to the other one. Laurie says, pretty bracelet. Thank you, darling. And on this halo bead, you'll see that the wire stays on top, goes from top to top. So it's the same technique, different look. Good morning from Connecticut. How's the weather in Connecticut, my lovely? I hope that you are doing well. You can change the size of the loops when you're working with linked wire. And I've even added on a couple of charms. So why don't we pop that up to the top, and I'll give this a quick shimmy, 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 shimmy. Odds and even, love that. Me too. Mix your wire colours up. You can even mix your wire gauges up. So I've got a handful of offcuts here in an antique bronze colourway, and these are all 18 gauge round. But I have made rosary linked and similar designs in the past using 20 gauge, even 22 gauge, and I once made a super fine chain with tiny, tiny beads that were a 24 gauge. It was interesting. Probably won't do it again, but you absolutely can. Good morning, Shakisha. How are you, sweetheart? Margaret says, love the bracelet, Gem. Thank you ever so much, my darling. So you've got all of those feisty, festival, lovely colours. Bit of a rainbow thing going on there. Oh, yes. But also, we've got Blackberry Baby. That might be an old ticket. I don't know. I've had that one hanging around, ready to work with today. So it's a very grown up, ever so slightly quieter design. But what I love to do then is to add that in to give an anti-pop. You know what you say when you're wearing like a grey or monochrome outfit and you add a pink necklace and you say, oh, it's a pop of colour. Well, I like to add a pop of monochrome, just like that. So we've got lots of choices on how we can work these up together. Roberta's joined us. Good morning to you, my lovely. Melanie is in. Good morning, my lovely. Been a while. Glad to have your company, sweet pea. So we're going to work up some chain links today, and you can go all colourful. You can go all mysterious, grown-up, sultry, or you can mix them together. Sophisticated, Gem. Sophisticated is a great word. It doesn't really describe me, I'm afraid. I'm not very sophisticated. Now, what you might notice if you're eagle-eyed down here is that I've used a rosary link as a charm drop extender. So rather than adding my little tassel directly onto the bracelet, I've made a little extender using the same technique. So I'm going to show you a couple of different variations. Oh, that looks like a heart. Let's leave it there. Rainbow love today. There we go. Dog hair on the board. Now I do have to give you a little bit of a heads up. Today my dogs are with me, and it's just me and them in the house. So I would never shut them out of my office, especially when it's just me. So they might bark, so sorry if they do. So I have a little scrap length of 18 gauge round wire. So Jessie James Beads says, I love that Tokyo Nights bead mix. Perfect for adding bold pops of colour. Yes, it is. Valerie has joined us. Hello, my darling. How are you? So let's give that wire a lovely warm through to get some warmth into it. Now, as I mentioned, and if you missed it earlier on, you don't have to just use 18 gauge. In fact, I've got a little reel of 20 gauge, which I'm going to work with in a little while to show you the differences in how that can look and feel in the hands. So if you're struggling with an 18 gauge, if it's a little bit too substantial for you, try a 20 gauge instead and see how you go. So this is far more wire than I need, but it's a length that I had available to me. So I'm probably just going to snip these ones in half and we'll do some very basic links to begin with. So my tools are, I got shipped a replacement set of memory wire finishing pliers because I accidented my other ones. So very lucky. Thank you very much, Meredith. Got some new ones. Happy days. So let's start with a basic closed rosary link. So why don't we choose a bead? Shall we start pink? Let's go pink. Vibrant, feisty. One of the things I really enjoy about this particular bead, and it has like a frosted finish, a matte finish to it, is that it doesn't matter what wire you put up the middle. When you put the wire in, you can really see it shining through that drill aperture. So if I take it out, it doesn't look quite as exciting. Pop it back in, and there we go. Jessie James Beads says, now I'm hungry for blackberries. I love those adorable little blackberry baby beads. Me too. One of the very first beads mixes that I worked with for Jessie James Beads. Makes me very happy. So what we're going to do is to start off by putting a right angle on one side of the bead. And I'm going to leave a little gap just there. So I tend to think of it as a space across the end of my pliers. Not too close to the tip, not all the way down. There we go. So that gives us an idea. What we'll do, I think, today is go through this from the ground up. We're going to make this super, super simple. So why don't I take the bead off? What I'm looking for when I make that right angle bend is quite a firm shape on the end. And all I did there was I just opened and closed that angle a little bit, and it just made a slightly sharper right angle at the end. Now you can, if you want to, use your looping pliers or your bail making pliers to do these loops in one. But I tend to teach in a much slower way for people who are terrified of wire. Like, I'm a little bit scared of cord, if I'm honest. I recently did a little bit of macrame for the first time in a long time. Really enjoyed it, but cord knotting is a little bit scary for me. And I know that some people feel that way about wire, so let's go slow. Now, you can use either one of these, or you can use your round nose pliers. I think I'm going to use the larger side, the larger pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. And what we're going to do, if I just turn that slightly sideways, I break this down into two moves. So I start off by getting a loop, half a shape on the end of that wire, pop that pin back in, and then I'll draw that end all the way around and over. Remove those, and you can see that we've got a centralised loop on the end. So what I'm going to do is to clench very firmly on that round shape at the end. And I'm just going to twist that around. That's a half a turn, one complete turn. I think I'll go 1.5 turns. That looks pretty reasonable to me. If you struggle to get that wire to go around the core, do consider using a 20 gauge, or I'll show you an alternative technique in a couple of minutes. So let's pop our chosen bead back on, and what we are going to do is start off with a closed rosary link, into which you can add everything else that you desire. Jem loves those little pliers for making perfect loops. Yes, yes I do. They are fabulous. They might have been invented for something else, but I like to use them for this. Now, when you're making a linking bracelet, necklace, earrings like this, if you want it to flow a little bit more freely on the neckline or the wrist, then it's really useful to put your loops at 90 degrees to each other. It depends on how you feel about that not quite symmetrical look. So you can see the loop is now flat to the board. So if I bring the wire up at 90 degrees again away from the board, what that means is that my two loops are going to be at 90 degrees to one another. So there's two schools of thought. If you make all of your loops in the same orientation, it will look very, very beautiful, but it won't flow quite so freely on the neckline or even on the board. Have a go, play around and see what you think. You can do both ways, but today I'm going to go for 90 degree opposite, I suppose. It's not really opposite, is it? But at 90 degrees difference. So I'm going to just scooch the bead all the way down to the first little wrapped loop we made. Grab my memory wire finishing pliers, which Sarah is absolutely right about. I do love them. Make that first half of the loop shape. And the reason I do it this way is to just slow it down and make it as simple as possible for people who are terrified of wire. When you get used to doing this, it's a lot quicker and a lot easier. So we're starting off with a closed rosary loop. So let me again hold on to that loop shape, and I'm not going to squish down where any wire crosses over, but I'm going to go for half a turn. If your wire starts to deviate from where you want it to go, you can very quickly bring that back up. It's very good like that is wire, especially if you warm it first. So I've gone for half a turn, a whole turn, and then we'll go for another half a turn. So 1.5 turns, exactly like we did on the first side. So I'm just going to tighten that little spiral up ever so gently, and you'll see that there's a bit of a gap. That's absolutely fine. So what we're going to do is to go another half turn at either end. So all the way around on that side. You need to change your orientation. So my wire is coming down the board at the moment. So let's flip that over the top. You know you've done half a turn, and there's still a gap either side of that bead. So I think one more half turn will suffice. What I'm going to do now is to grab a second pair of chain nose pliers. And in that way, we will be able to apply a little bit extra force. I don't like to use the word force with wire. Coercion. So I'm going to use my second pair of chain nose pliers to hold that loop really firmly, and then I'm going to use my original chain nose pliers to make another half wire wrap. So I'm just going to use those pliers, and I'm being very, very soft and gentle. I'm not pushing so hard or pulling so hard that I'm changing the shape of the loop. I'm just very, very gently, just asking that to go round in a half turn. So exactly the same again. So for me, I'm right dominant. I tend to use my right hand to do the twisty bit, my left hand to do the holding bit. So again, it's pointing down the board at the moment. So what I'm doing is very small movements, and I'm not putting really any pressure. I'm just guiding that wire around until it sits where I want it to. So there's really no gap left between the wires and the beads now. So we're just going to trim away that end section on both sides. So obviously, be careful of your bead. The reason I put my thumb over the top is not to try and cut the tip of my thumb off. It is to stop the wire pinging into my camera because it's very expensive to replace. There we go. So those are the two little bits of wire trimmed away. And what you'll notice, if I bring that up into the blurry zone, can you see there in that shining light, there's a sticky outy bit. Well, we don't want sticky outy bits, also known as a sticky uppy bit. So just over the top, just here, it's sticking away from the core, and we want it to be flush to the core. So I'm going to put the pliers over that little wrap, and I'm just going to very, very gently move my pliers. Now I'm putting barely any tension on with my right hand. I'm just scooching that around. And then onto the other side, it's in the other direction, so I'm going to bring that towards me, and you'll see that very quickly that sticky uppy bit becomes a lie downy bit. So there is your simple closed rosary loop. Now you may have seen that before. I'm sure I've showed it to you before. If it's still sticking up at all, you can get right in there and give it a bit more of a squish. Let's support the other end and make sure that you're happy. Sticky outy bits can catch on clothes and hair and the such, so let's make it all nice and flush. That looks good. So when you have got one of these ready made up, you need to make a second one, but you need to only wrap one end at a time. So we're going to create a second loop, but what we'll probably do is add a little bit of a spiral, maybe on one end, because this is quite a short piece of wire. In fact, that'll probably look the same. Let's get a long bit of wire instead. Let's do something fancy instead. So what colour bead am I going to put next to this pink? Are we going to go colour clashing, or are we going to go grown up and sultry? Or are we going to go colour matching? Are we going to have a little block of pinks? If you're making a long line necklace, you could go for all of your rainbow colours. If you wanted to go that way, there's always the option. There's loads of colours in this design, in this mix. They are absolutely beautiful beads. So when it comes to using your faux pearls, quite often you can very easily get that 18 gauge wire. It looks like it will go. But if it's giving you any indication that it doesn't want to, just use a 20 gauge instead. Pop of yellow, it is, my love. Good job. Okay, so with this one being a smaller bead, we might give it a little bit of a halo over the top. So let's go for that. What must we always do before we get wiring? Let's go. There we are. Hi, Gem and all, says Maria. How are you, sweet pea? Cindy says, hello, grown up. We'll do a black one from the grown up mix next. So we're going to go for a pop of yellow now. So again, what we're going to do is to imagine our bead is in the centre. If you struggle to imagine, just pop it on there for a second. I struggle to find the drill hole because I'm just that clever. So I've centralised my smaller yellow bead. Maria's in from Buena Park in Southern California. How's the weather for you, darling? Really hot today, I understand. So this is probably about 6 or 7 inches of wire now. So again, I'm going to just put a first bend in at one side. And just to help me, I'm going to flip that wire over, pop my pliers on the far side, and put another bend in at right angles. So it stops the bead from flying off, basically, is what I'm telling to you. Maureen is in. Hello, darling. Where are you watching from today? So let us begin by repeating that wrapped loop. So let's spin the wire around, like I said to you earlier. We're just going to go for half a technique at a time. Slow things down and keep it easy and simple. Wrap that all the way around the pin of your pliers and you've got your wrapped loop ready to link in. So at this stage, we're going to add our first chain link. Is it portage or portage? I wouldn't know how to pronounce it. Hopefully one of those is correct. Welcome. I hope you're having a beautiful day. What's the weather like? So what you can do if you want to is create a whole bunch of closed links, but half as many as you need in your final piece. So if you're making a great big long line necklace and you want it to be 20 odd inches long, let's have a look at how long this link is. I'd say it's about an inch, probably not far off. Let's grab the ruler. Yep, so each one of those little pink rosary links would be about an inch long. So if you were aiming for a 20-inch necklace, I'd say get 10 of those ready and then pop 10 just onto pieces of wire like so, and then you can sit and link all of your already done bits together. So let's slide our closed rosary link down onto the one we've just started working on. And if you'll see, there's a little bit of a gap just there, and that's purposeful. When I wrapped the wire around my memory wire finishing pliers, gives me an opportunity to just make it very easy to pop the link into position. Once that's in, you can very easily squish that up with your fingers. When you're working with 18 gauge, it's very easy to do so. So why don't we start by wrapping 1.5 times around that core wire. So I am going to grab hold of that loop. I'm also going to point out to you, in case you're listening to me and not watching, if you're loving the multicolour design of this bracelet, remember JJB is running 15% off the multicolour collection. Sale ends tonight. Use code, all capitals, True Colours to redeem. So there's a lovely little link for you there to follow. Do go ahead and make use of that discount code. Mary is in from Warren, is in Indiana. I'm not very good with state abbreviations, I'm afraid. So what we'll do is hold across this time. So because there's now a link adding into my loop, it pays to use the larger side on your memory wire finishing pliers, or a reasonable size on your round nose pliers. We're going to wrap that wire back and over the top to begin with, so that's just half a turn. And again, if it comes out of where you want it to, a little squish, tell it to go where you need it to. What I'm doing when I'm holding the loop like so is I'm not squashing the link, and I'm not squashing anywhere wire crosses over. So I just need to lift this up so I can get the tail all the way around and finish that 1.5 wraps. Now, something that I want to show you is when you're wrapping around a core wire, let me bring this up slightly, is you'll get gaps. So I can actually get my nail between those two wires. That doesn't make me happy. So what we're going to do is very gently compress that to get a very neat spring effect. Happy days. So we're just going to ignore that sticking up piece of wire. We've secured the two links together, and I've got 1.5 wraps to keep my bead from sliding around unnecessarily. So let's pop down the bent chain nose pliers, grab a hold of the memory wire finishing pliers, and we'll go for step 1. Make the first half of your loop. Step 2, draw that all the way around. At this stage, I'm not overly worried about whether it goes underneath or over the top. So I've got my little loop. And what I think I might do is close this one up. So I'm always going to be working now in this direction. There's my end, and we're going to build the chain in that direction. So let's begin by wrapping 1.5 times. Now, why do I do 1.5 times on either side when I can see there's going to be much more wire needed to fill the gap? It's because I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. And also, it's really easy to go, oh, I'm sure I can fit 4 wraps in there, put 4 wraps in, and then you can only fit 2 on the other side. And that doesn't make me happy. I want it to be relatively centralised on my link. So I think I will push that round for a second turn and just make sure that I'm happy that that's all nice and tidy. And then I'll just flip over to the other side and do a half turn to bring that to the same status. There we go. So if we're going to do a halo design, we're going to start off by making sure that our long sticky outy wires are opposite to each other. So that means I've got to go just a quarter turn with one of these wires. So what I tend to do is take a look and see if one's slightly longer. So this one is slightly longer, so I'm just going to turn that over a quarter of the way around. You can obviously do that with your pliers. There we go. And then you've got one wire going one way, one wire going the other way, which is how I want it to be for the time being. So once I've assessed what it is I want to do, I think I'm going to continue wrapping those wires until they meet in the middle. So I think I will go over the top now to create another half turn. Maybe we'll go for a whole turn. I think we can fit a whole turn. Flip this one around so that it's on my dominant side and go for a whole turn again. So one of these will in fact be just a quarter turn more, but I'm not going to let that worry me. If it does bother you, what you can do is bring it back a quarter of a turn. Let me show you what I'm talking about. In fact, let's take this one just a little bit further over, flip to the other side, and then by the time I've brought that one around, they should be relatively equalised. So once they're nice and opposing each other, you've got a similar amount of wire on either end. What we're going to do is a little bit of a halo. So I need to warm this wire. Every time you cause that to coil around the core wire, it gets a little bit firmer again. So let's make it nice and toasty warm. And I think to begin with, what we're going to do is replicate this design, which is where the halo of wire sits on the same side of the bead. So it comes from on the top of the core wire to on top of the core wire. Looks quite different from underneath, like so. And what we're going to do is bring one all the way around the bead. So let's start with this slightly longer one, nice and warm. We're going to allow that to just move gently until it comes over the top of the bead, like so. Just bring this one out of the way for a second. And I think what we'll probably do in actual fact is do this all with the same wire. So let's trim one of those away. I've taken the slightly shorter one and cut it off at the back. Got that wire all the way around. And if I just bring that Make sure that that's nice and tidy where I've just trimmed that away. I'm going to push that around the core so it's wrapping on top of what we've previously wrapped on top of, all the way over the top. I'm just going to turn that around slowly so that I can move back in the other direction. Now, if you get to this stage and you think, actually, there really isn't very much wire left here, you can just turn that into a coil. So I did one on this mixed bracelet, here it is, where there's a coil just on one end. So if you like the asymmetrical look or the quirky look, then you can do something like that. I think there might just about be enough wire. Let's give it a go. If there isn't, I can always remove it, take it back and tuck it into a coil. So I've just pulled that so that it halos around the top of the bead. And again, both wires go from the top of the core to the top of the core. And then we'll just bring that last little tail around. If it fails to reach, we can undo that and turn it into a little coil. That looks good to me. So there we've got our next little unique link in the chain. So you can make these chains as long as you want them to be. Let's grab another piece of wire and see what's next. Now, did we have a vote for a black bead next? Let's have a look. How about one of these funky shaped step twist cut? So a step cut is where you have, let's see if I can get the light on it. There we go. Step cut is like long slices like this, but these are twisting around the bead at a very funky shape. It's absolutely divine. I love it. What are these called, Sarah? Are they twisted? I would call it a twisted step faceted bead. So let's just pop that in the centre of another about 7 or 8 inch length of 18 gauge round wire. And what we'll do is we'll start off again by putting a couple of angles in there. So let's make a right angle just here. If I turn that over by 90 degrees, a right angle just here. Now these are quite long pieces of wire, so that's probably going to get right on my nerves. I love the way that step catches the light as well. So your step facet is, it's like an ascending, let's get it orientated correctly. There it is. So there's one. Moving around, and because it twists, it's going to catch the light from all the angles. Let's just get some loops made, shall we? So we're going to use those memory wire finishing pliers. There we go. We've got half a loop ready to go. Draw the wire all the way around underneath. And as I said to you before, just take your time if you're new. And if you get really comfortable with it, you can do that all in one move, and you can even start wiggling that tail of wire around to tie things in a knot. In fact, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean when I say do it all in one. So you can bring your memory wire finishing pliers in, you can turn that wire all the way around, take the tail over, and you've got it all done in one hit. So you can do this by using the other pin of your pliers to create that angle, but I much prefer having a really nice strong right angle to begin with. So I'm going to close one of those loops. Let's draw that all the way around a good couple of times because I've made a really long central core for this one. And I've done this squiffy on purpose. I don't know if squiffy is a word in the United States. Just means a bit dodgy, really. So can you see how loose and terrible that is? If that happens and you hate it, you can undo it a little bit and tidy it up. Warming your wire before you start your working is key to being able to fix these kind of little fluffs that happen. So that's much tidier, and it took barely a second, and I didn't have to cut any wire up. So let's just smooth and warm that through, and let's get on to the other side. So you can, especially if you're working with that 20 gauge, that slightly lighter wire, just give your loop a teeny tiny gentle squish. Now I'm not pressing down where the wires cross over because that would cause the crossover section, the nexus point, to be weakened, and we don't want that. So what we can do is give it a little bit of a squish to strengthen it, and if we need to, we can just gently open that up like a jump ring. So let's add our chain in. Didn't know about warming the wire, I will do that. One of the reasons that warming the wire is so important is that as you warm the wire, you get it smoother and it's more willing to do the funny things you want it to do. And then after about, it depends how hot it is where you live actually, after about 24 hours here, the wire starts to harden. And I'm not a scientist, but it's all to do with when you apply heat to a copper core or similar materials, you excite those little electrons and they all get in a nice little line, and the wire itself becomes much more floopy and ready to do your things. Once it starts to cool back down, it's actually a little bit harder than when you started. So every time you give this a bit of a working over, in the long run, you're actually making it stronger, but you do have that short period of time. So like I said, it could be 24 hours. If you live somewhere very cold, it could be a little bit shorter. If you live somewhere very hot, it could be a little bit longer. But after that time, your wire is actually stronger, which is a bonus. So again, once we've added our closed link into the link we're working on, grip across that loop. I'm not putting any pressure. You can see my loop is free moving. I'm not putting any pressure on where the wires cross over, because when you, hold on, let me just have a look. If you take 2 pieces of scrap wire, let's just cross them over for a second, and you very gently squish them together. So I'm not really putting any pressure. What you risk doing is this. So you can see really straight away with a very little amount of pressure that you've got this very gnarly looking little divot in the wire, but that becomes very weakened, and it doesn't take much to just kind of snap that away. So always take care that you're not putting pressure down on crossing over wires unless you're instructed to do so, because sometimes you'll need to, but it's very gentle. So let's draw this tail of wire around and try to make a neater job of it this time. So drawing, I'm pulling the wire away, and that draws the wire that's coiling around the core. The core is what goes through the bead. And adding that little bit of tension will bring the wire closer to the core, and everything should be just a little bit neater. So I think I'll take that over one more time on this side. And if it sticks up a little bit, you can give it a teeny tiny squish. I've lost count of how many times I've twisted the wire, so I'm just going to go visually and guess now. So supporting the loop that you're working from and pushing that tail of wire around until you get those 2 sticky outy bits approximately opposite each other. Now if you're going to do a double coil end, let's have a look, see if I can find, here's the example. So that looks to me like a Blackberry anyway. It's a very beautiful, feisty little bead, but I think that comes from Tokyo Nights, which is why it's such a perfect team with the other mix over here, which is Blackberry Baby. So mix and match your colours as well. I've got copper wire and I've got antique bronze wire. But what we're going to do now is we'll add a coil either side, and then we'll sit the coil over the loop. This is a great technique if you're making bar necklaces, because it enables you to hide your connection points. So what I'll do in this instance is try to get the wires on the same side of the core wire. So at the moment they're both on top. Now what you'll notice is because they're both on top and my loops are at right angles, it means that the visible number of times you've wrapped around the core is different. So this side it looks like 2.5, this side it looks like 3. And that's because, yes, this side has wrapped 1 extra half time. But in this instance, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be covering those wraps up with some coils. So what we're going to do is to gently smooth those wires away from your project for a second. Try to get them nice and smooth. Line them up. That was Mojo having a sneeze, if you heard him. He's my small dog. He's a Jack Russell. He's a bit of a handful, but I love him very much. Hello, baby. So I'm going to trim these to the same length. It's around about 2¼ inches from the point it leaves the bead assembly to the cut end, and that will give me 2 really large spirals. Now if spirals befuddle and confuse you, be confused no more. It's very, very easy once you get it going. I'm just trying to get that to sit down flat. So let's grab our either round nose pliers, or in my case the memory wire finishing pliers, and I'm going to start off with the small side today until I get almost all of a circular form. So if I just flick that in the light, you'll be able to see it. And then, let's just pull that one out of the way a second. What I'm going to do now is use my non-dominant forefinger as a pad into which I'm going to push this form. So in that way you'll end up with a much more central, a round central aperture rather. So sometimes when you're making coils you end up with egg shapes or funny little other things that are not as you desire. Now, of course, funny little egg shapes in the centre of spirals are perfectly acceptable, but if you desire round centres in your spirals, and more of that to come with summer camp, we're going to be doing some lovely large centred spirals, much like this actually, in one of our projects on summer camp. So if you can join us, join us. Lots of projects coming your way with fabulous tutors. So all I'm doing is about 1/4 of a turn at a time, just creating that spiral until it sits as close to the bead as possible. So if I pull that one more little 1/4 of a turn, it's just sitting over the top at the moment. Now I'm not going to push this down just yet. I'm going to make a spiral for the other side. Grab the correct pliers, grab the correct side of the correct pliers. And again, we don't make a complete circle. Going to make almost a circle. Gripping that form and pushing it into the non-dominant hand, you'll get that slightly more circular form. Of course, it doesn't always work. Sometimes you just get a weird egg shape anyway. So I'm using my non-dominant hand as a backstop, and I'm using my dominant hand to push into that. Now normally when my shoulder is working I would do half and half. So half of the manoeuvre would be left hand, half of the manoeuvre would be right hand. My left hand isn't really very good today, so what I'm doing is just allowing my left hand to sit there and do very little, and doing all of the work with my right hand. If you have a physical impairment that makes that difficult for you, then you can always take your time to adjust the techniques to suit you. There's usually a way. So very, very mindful I'm not hurting the bead, but drawing that spiral so that it sits right up against the bead. Now I'm going to finish this side, but I'm not going to finish this side until we add the next link in. So I'm going to put a little bit of warmth onto that spiral, and then I'm going to push it down over the top of my rosary link. And in that way, it just looks like it's magically floating its connection. So let's grab our next bead. What colour are we going for next? Am I going Tokyo Nights or Blackberry Baby? Let's have a feel. I think that's a beautiful choice, but you tell me if there's anything else you fancy. It's a beautiful festive affair. The blue. Laurie got in there first. We're going with Laurie. Thank you, my darling. So one of the things you can do with a design like this is just play around to your heart's content. If you want to have a simple rosary link followed by a fancy, simple, fancy, simple, fancy, that's great. That's going to look beautiful. But what you can also do is just make it completely random. Jumble it all up to your heart's content. So why don't we grab another piece of that? In fact, why don't we get a little bit of 20 gauge next? So let's just unspool some 20 gauge. This is a soft copper I'm just grabbing off screen now, just to show that you can make a very effective chain out of 20 gauge. It's easier to work with if you're newer to wire. Let's just trim that end away, that's a little bit ugly. Hello Donna, how are you, sweetie? Yay, says Laurie. Ah, it's for you. So again, even though you're working with a lighter wire, let's give it a warm. Love that vibrant pop of blue. I adore these blue beads. They are half aura coated, which means that it looks a little bit different from either angle you look at it. So the one that's on the board just here has got the aura coating up. I don't know if you can even see. Yes, you can. There was a perfect purple. It did it for a second and then I moved it. Oh well, that's about right for me. So let us again pop that on the middle of your wire. So this is again about 7 or 8 inches, and this time I'm using some 20 gauge. Now once it's built up into a beautiful chain, it's perfectly strong enough. By itself, 20 gauge is a little bit too floopy for a lot of things. Let's put a little angle on one side, flip it round by 90 degrees? No? Yes? Yes? I'm not a maths person. I confuse myself. And then we're going to create the first link. So I'm going for a teeny tiny link on this side because I think that everything goes with everything. Everything goes with everything. Might just get that a little bit more centralised though. And then I'm going to pop that into the black bead loop. Oops-a-daisy. Like so. And I'll get this side tied off with a couple of little rotations. So hold on to that loop without crushing where the wire crosses over. I'm very gently holding that. My hand's got to go in the way for a second, I'm afraid. So because this is a lighter wire, it means it's thinner across as well. So I'm going to just go for 2 rotations to begin with. And then we'll make a loop on the other side. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is don't feel that everything has to be uniform. Just because you see something in social media and every loop is exactly the same, doesn't mean yours has to be. I love Big Little Chain, and Big Little Chain is coming up for this weekend's tutorial actually. What I'm going to do is grab hold of my multi-step bail makers and make a different size loop on the other end. Just because I can. Let's draw that tail all the way around and then we'll put these back out of the way. So there's a huge loop on this side. Now if you wanted to, once you've created your chain all the way around, use that to put your closure, your fastener into, then that makes your life easier. Don't feel that you have to have them be completely balanced. So this is probably going to be our last link of the day. So I'm just going to, I tell you what, why don't we make a quick charm, super fast charm, and then this will be our last link. So one of the easiest ways you can take a bead and make it a charm is by creating a little spiral head pin. So we're going to go for 2 rotations of wire around in a coil, like so. And then we're going to turn that wire away so you get like a little lollipop. What colour bead? Pick a bead. Purple? Barrel? Choose me a bead, folks, so that we can add on to our close your loop. That big loop on the end is going to be where I imagine I'd put my, possibly a lobster clasp in. The barrel bead. Well done. Let's pop that baby on there. I think that's actually really beautiful. So when you're adding charms to a bracelet, you can either go for a wrapped loop or you can make a simple loop. I'm going to go for a simple loop. Simple loop. Ah, I'm sorry, darling. I saw barrel come up first. I'll do purple next time. So let's make that shape up at the top. And this is a simple loop. So you need to trim away that wire where it crosses over. Let's just pop that out of the way. Where it crosses over, coming out of the end. And I'm just going to close that down. Give that a squish. Make that really, really nice and hard. There is AB finish on that barrel. I've called it a barrel. It's probably not called that. You know me. I don't know what any of them are called. So what we're going to do is add our chosen charm onto that closure loop. Now I would normally do a closure loop in an 18 gauge because it needs to be strong and remain strong. But I'm doing this all in one go so that you can see as many different techniques so that your own beautiful, prideful rainbow necklace, bracelet or earrings can be as unique as you are. So I've gone for 3.5 wraps on that side, which means I need to turn around to the other side. Go for another couple of wraps on this side. Hold on to that loop and control it without squishing it any. That looks reasonable. You can obviously take a lot more time and keep your wrapping tidy. If it gets away from you, you can usually just close that a little bit. There we go, that's better. What we're going to do now, before I finish my blue bead wrap, is we're going to go back to the preceding one and we're just going to push that coil down flat. So that is your invisible, it's just hanging there by itself with spirals coming out of it. I absolutely adore that technique, really love it. There's an example on the board just there as well. Kathleen says, love it, thank you very, very much. Jessie James has gone all rainbow, well done. So let's have a look. So we have, I think, one more technique to share with you today. And I think what we should do is cut one of these away. So I tend to cut the smaller one away where possible. Trim that down, and then obviously you would want to give that a bit of a squish. Again, take your time. Take a lot more time than I am. Get that nice and tidy. What we're going to do is add a loop over the surface of the bead, and that's really nice to do in 20 gauge. Anne is in from California. Hello, my lovely. How are you this morning? I hope life is good, and I hope you're not too toasty. Anne was telling me it's going to be like 100 degrees in California today. Yesterday it was lovely temperature. Today it's a little bit toasty. So what you'll notice, and I'll just show you what I just fixed, is that with the 20 gauge you'll often get deviations. So once or twice you'll be able to close that up, get it to sit straight. Do take your time, and you shouldn't have that problem in the first place. As I mentioned before, when you do the bigger loop on the end into which you can put your hook, do make it out of 18 gauge. I'm just demonstrating with 20 gauge to show you variations. I am doing fine. Good, thank you. You rock, Gem. Thank you so much, Maureen. That's very kind. Laurie says gorgeous. Thank you too. So I'm going to give that a really good smooth through. Now this is a pure copper wire that I have in my hand right now. It has no coating. It's also known as raw copper or bare copper. I love working with it. It can make your hands smell of metal, which to me, I'll just go and wash them. That's fine. So I've got a single wire on one side, and what I'm going to do is make that super warm, and I'm just going to allow it to languorously go onto the surface of the bead, and you can see it's relatively close to that bead. And I'm going to loop that back round on itself, but what I'm doing is I'm using the furthest point of my thumb to connect with the edge of the bead and allow that wire to create a nice circular form around the tip of my thumb, or the pad of my thumb rather. So let me do that on the other side and see if I can show you a little bit more. So I'm just pushing down with my thumb and pulling the wire around, and you can see I do this wiggly technique. Makes the camera wobble, but all good fun. So that just enables the wire to go where I want it to go. Now, you have choices about where you can take this tail of wire, but I'm going to take it, because we started moving in that direction, I'm just going to bring it down here. I think it looks nice. Be guided by your own aesthetics. This is a you project. This is a unique and an individual piece, just like you. So let's draw that wire down back now so that it meets the wrapping we did on the core. And I'm going to pull that all the way around. Excuse me, Mr. Charm. And pull really firmly whilst pressing down really firmly. Now, the reason I'm putting a lot of pressure, or as much as I can today, with my left hand is because I want to put tension in this wrap with my right hand. So because I'm working with 20 gauge, can you see how much easier it is to move that around with my fingers even, without a set of pliers? And I can get that almost completely tidied away. When it comes to the last little bit, we are going to just go scoochy, 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 and it is tidied away instantly. So do experiment with different colours of wire, add different techniques together, go for a halo, go for a little squiggle on top. That's the one we've just done. There's an example of an asymmetric one with just a coil at one end. Here's a haloed one. And then I've added some charms onto my bracelet just here, and I adore these little flowers. Mary says, thank you very much, outstanding knowledge. Oh, I appreciate that so much. I'm going to blush. Should I show you my face again? Do you need to see my face again? I feel like my face is kind of boring. Hello. Donna says, lovely, love. Thank you very much, my darling. So, there was my example piece. I'll just show you that one more time. I handmade a hook clasp for this, but at Jessie James Beads, we have bunches of closures. Toggle clasps, little lobster connectors, all sorts. Or you can make one yourself if you want to. And I added 3 charms to this one with a technique that I shared with you in today's tutorial video. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that those fantastic colours from Tokyo Nights inspire you to go colour crazy. My necklace has gone wonky. What's it doing over there? Lots of great techniques, says Valerie. Roberta loves my face. Thanks. Laurie says, thank you, Jem and Sarah. And the other comments have gone off the screen because you're all so lovely. What can I say? Thank you very, very much. Big love to each and every one of you, from everyone at Jessie James Beads and from myself. I'm Jem, and today we have been sharing with you the beautiful Tokyo Nights and the fabulously seductive Blackberry Baby. Thank you, thank you, thank you ever so much for all of your kind words and comments today. I'll try to catch up on the comments in a little while, but I can't look at them and look at you. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for hanging out with us here today at Jessie James Beads, and I will be back very, very soon. Bye for now.